Welcome to Mormon Land, where we explore news in and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm senior religion reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack. Joining me is senior managing editor David Noyce, who oversees our faith coverage. Hi, Dave.
Hello, Peggy.
Before we start, we remind you about another way to support Mormon Land. Just go to patreon.com, where with a donation as small as $3 a month, you can access transcripts to our podcasts, our complete newsletter, and all of our religion coverage. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/MormonLand. And if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram at Mormon.land. Now for today's episode. Next week, Jewish adherents across the globe will begin the annual 10-day examination of their lives and deeds. It starts with Rosh Hashana, Jewish New Year, on the evening of October 2nd, and concludes with Yom Kippur on the evening of October 11th, the Day of Atonement. It is a time for self-reflection, for commemoration, for celebration, and for recommitment. It is a chance to think about forgiveness and to make amends to those they have harmed. This year's High Holy Days are especially fraught for the world's Jewry, as so many eyes are on Israel and its ongoing battles against Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. There's also a war in Ukraine and deep divisions in the United States during this election season. Here to discuss the importance of these holidays is Rabbi Samuel Spector of Salt Lake City's Congregation of Kol Ami. Rabbi Spector, welcome.
Thank you, Peggy. Thanks, Dave, for having me. Always happy to be here.
Tell us briefly about these holidays. First, Rosh Hashana. What's the celebration like and what are its meanings?
Sure. So Rosh Hashana commemorates the creation of the world and humankind. And I like to think of it as an opportunity for us to start to recreate ourselves. As you mentioned, we have these powerful 10 days between the beginning of Rosh Hashana and the end of Yom Kippur. And we learned during that time that on Rosh Hashana, God makes a list of who is going to have a place in the world for the next year and who is not going to be written into the book of life. But over those 10 days, we have the opportunity to change God's mind. And at once Yom Kippur is over, that list is sealed. So there's a little bit at stake, but I prefer to think of it less literally and more of if my life were to end in the next year, would I be remembered as a good person?
So what do you do on that holiday?
On Rosh Hashana, we get together, pray, listen to the rabbi talk too much, and also give some sermons. Very commonly, people will have a dinner at their home with the start of Rosh Hashana, a nice family dinner. And Rosh Hashana takes a bit more of a festive, celebratory feeling to it of beginning a new year. We are entering the Jewish year of 5785. And Yom Kippur, on the other hand, has a bit more of a solemn feel. And on Rosh Hashana, one of the things that we look forward to is the sounding of the shofar, a ram's horn that awakes us to the time of the year it is. And we also do some other rituals. We toss breadcrumbs or Cheerios or something like this in a nearby stream to wash away our sins to begin the new year on a good note. And we also eat apples dipped in honey to wish each other a sweet new year.
So what about Yom Kippur? Tell us about that.
Yom Kippur is a very solemn day. We have 25 hours of fasting if you're medically able to, of no food, no water. We have 5 prayer services and people are praying throughout the day. And it is a day where we are really thinking about what we have done individually and communally that we could be doing a better job of, and also how we can seek forgiveness from others, how we can improve ourselves over the next year and make our life worth living, and also perhaps how we can forgive others, or even if we aren't in a place to forgive others, how we don't let anger hold us captive for the next year.
So what about any plans at Kol Ami specifically? Yeah,
so we have our Rosh Hashana services that begin on the evening of October 2nd, and then the morning of October 3rd and October 4th. And And then we have at Yom Kippur services the evening of October 11th and pretty much the entire day from morning to night on October 12th. And while most of our services are open to the general public, these ones people need a ticket for. However, for security purposes and also to make sure that we have enough seating. But people are able to go on our website and get a ticket if they're wanting to join us.
Do more people come on the High Holy
Days? So typically at a Shabbat service on Saturday morning, we'll have about 70, 80 people. Mm-hmm. I would guess that on the evening of Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre service, we get about 700 people that come to our synagogue.
Wow.
So 10 times.
Yeah. You talked about the rabbi talking too much,
exactly.
Sometimes. So, can you give us a preview? What kind of messages are you planning to give?
Sure. So this year, really, all of my messages have to do a lot with what's been going on over in Israel. How do we balance universalism of caring for every person with also particularism, self-preservation of the Jewish people? We are, I'll be talking some about how do we rationalize love of God and having a terrible year. We'll be talking some about loneliness and how this past year has felt very, very lonely for Jewish people, but also even within our Jewish community, some folks have felt lonely within the Jewish community because maybe they have not agreed with Israel's actions during wartime and have found themselves wondering what their place is within our Jewish community. And so those are just some of the things I'll be talking about. I give 7 sermons over the 7 large sermons over those 10 days. So each one will be talking a bit on the past year, but one of my sermons is also on gratitude. I was in Israel a few weeks after October 7th, and I met an individual who on October 7th survived the massacre, but his wife and 15-year-old son were killed, and he lost his leg, and his house was burned down, and he talked about how lucky he felt because he said many people's babies were killed on that day, and they didn't get to see them grow up, be 15-year-old young men who were kind. There was a couple who was killed the week before their wedding. I got to spend 35 years with my wife, and okay, I lost my leg, but I got to spend 51 years being an able-bodied person. And he's like, I'm so fortunate. And that's what part of my message will be too, is how do we, in the midst of difficulty, still find blessing and gratitude?
So obviously the rise of anti-Semitism and the increasing violence on the world stage, including in America, is your community worried about threats or attacks? And have you had to take steps to protect your congregation?
Sadly, over the past year, we've seen, since 2015, we've seen anti-Semitism growing annually to record numbers almost every year. In 2022, there were nearly 3,000 anti-Semitic incidences in the United States recorded by the ADL, who estimates, from what I've heard, that they only record 1 out of every 40 events, that most events are not reported. And last year, that number reached close to 9,000. And most of that was towards the end of 2023. So I don't know what the 2024 numbers are, but we had this horrible thing that happened on October 7th, and we received our first of 4 bomb threats on October 8th that we've got in the past year. And we've sadly had to file numerous police reports because of harassment, threats, intimidation. So we've in the past year had to do some construction projects to make our synagogue safer. If you go to the synagogue right now, you will see 2 police cars in our parking lot because whenever our building is open, we have a police presence, or try to at least, and we have to pay for those off-duty officers. So over the past year, between what we desire to do for capital improvements and also having police officers present, we've been looking at somewhere around $500,000 for security.
Sadly, with those threats aside, how do you and your congregation feel about living in Utah? Do you feel, do your members and you feel accepted and loved by the surrounding culture?
I feel immensely loved and accepted here. For every bad thing that's happened, we've had 100 amazing things. We had a gentleman who a few weeks after October 7th, he and his wife showed up at our synagogue with 2 boxes of chocolates and gave one to me and said, "This is for you and your wife because I bet you've had a horrible month. And this is for somebody else in your community who you know is struggling." We had gotten so many letters when people heard about our financial issues due to security. We had people call in who donated $10 and others who donated $10,000 just to make us feel loved. And one of our local LDS stakes, the East Mill Creek stake, they called us the last week of October and said, "We don't know how to help, but we want to send our young people to your houses to do a leaf cleanup so you have one less thing to worry about." So in Utah, the amount of love and support we've received has been beyond anything I could ever imagine. I think the challenge here is that I used to be a rabbi in Los Angeles, and synagogues in Los Angeles are about as common as wards are in Utah. Mm-hmm. And so you got one on every block. And so if I'm a bad guy who wants to vandalize or threaten a synagogue, I have hundreds I can choose from. And so most synagogues won't receive too much specifically there. Here, we're kind of a big fish in a small pond. And so I think that there's more love, more acceptance here. However, like everywhere, we do have some bad people and some crazies. And unfortunately, we hear from them a bit more just because there's not a plethora of synagogues for them to target.
Yeah, I was going to ask you specifically about, since this is Mormon land, about your relationships with Latter-day Saints and top Latter-day Saint leaders.
Yeah, that's been really one of the blessings of being here for me is I have gotten to know pretty much all the apostles and leadership of the church, and they've been wonderful friends to me, wonderful mentors. And the local Latter-day Saint community has just been phenomenal. When I was in Israel in October, in the end of October, beginning of November, my Labrador got a little overly excited while I was gone, I guess, and he tore both of his ACLs and he had some surgery. And but for a little bit, he couldn't walk, and he's a 90-pound big boy, and my wife couldn't bring him outside. She was calling me in Israel saying, "I don't know what to do. I can't get him outside to go to the bathroom." So I called the stake president, said, "You got any missionaries who can help carry my dog outside?" And
wow.
People were coming by my house, taking him out. And that's the thing with them is I always know I can turn to them for friendship, for help, and hope they know the same about me. Got a wonderful friendship. Interestingly, Jews vote Democrat in, I think, larger blocks than any other religion in the country. And Latter-day Saints typically vote Republican.
Reliably Republican.
Yeah.
More than any
That's
how we describe it. Yeah.
And, and that said, I know Democrat Latter-day Saints. I certainly know Jewish Republicans. So we do, I think, often find moments of disagreement, but those are always treated with dignity. And I think we've gotten to learn from each other and grow together. That's been a real blessing. So I think that my friendship with the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints and the experience I've had being here in Utah has been truly one of the greatest blessings of my life.
So let's go back to the tradition of Yom Kippur.
Yeah.
And what does it add to the world's understanding of forgiveness and repentance?
I think there's a couple things. One is it's a reminder that we're all human. I'm the rabbi. I'm fasting along with everybody else. I'm there confessing my sins along with everybody else. We all have shortcomings. I certainly have a lot, and I'm supposed to be the moral exemplar for the community. So I think it's a very humbling day on one hand. And also, though, we list all of these, since there's this prayer called the Ashamnu, when we go through and it's an acrostic of the Hebrew alphabet, where every single letter of the Hebrew alphabet, you have a different sin. You go, Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu. And as you go through the whole thing, and these are things basically like, I lied, I murdered, I stole. And you get to those, and, I might be there. Each one of us might be kind of like rolling our eyes, going through all of it of like, okay, we murdered, we stole. And you're going through things where you're like, I didn't murder anybody in the last year. I didn't steal anybody last year. And then you get to something, it's like, I gossiped. And then you go, I did that one. And, and so you feel almost like a spotlight. And the idea is not that one person did all these things. I hope not one person didn't do all those things, but that somebody within the Jewish world over the last year did do each one of these things. Somebody in the Jewish world did commit murder. Somebody in the Jewish world did steal. And we all have a responsibility towards each other to help make the world that we share and live in a better place. So it's a day for a lot of reflection, I think.
So you're going through this list, and at some point it becomes very reflective, right?
Yes, hopefully
it's going to get to something.
Yeah. I mean, if not, then if you feel like none of this applies to me, then maybe go back to the one that's like, we were arrogant.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, let's go to the Middle East, the sad things happening there. When you see the suffering of especially innocents, but everyone in Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, what thoughts run through your mind?
It's tragic. I haven't been to Gaza. I've been to the West Bank plenty. And I've been on the border with Gaza. I lived in Israel. I've been to Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, and met with Hezbollah militants, actually. And I think most people don't want suffering. And I feel like that sometimes you get, I mean, I have a bias. I'm not going to act like I don't. I try and always see other perspectives and understand other perspectives. The way that I see this war is that it didn't have to start, and then Hamas chose to start it. Hezbollah chose to join in. And that unfortunately the leaders of those organizations are happy to have civilian casualties to promote their cause and use their own people as human shields. So, I mean, I'm not trying to get overly political here. I'm sure that some listeners are irate with what I just said, but I think that, I've gotten to know, like I said, the Lebanese people through my time in Lebanon. I've gotten to know the Palestinian people through my time in the Palestinian territories. And I've certainly gotten to know the Israeli people. They're all beautiful people. And I think that what's happening is really, really, really tragic. And my hope is that, where I have more hope after October 7th is with the complete failure of the Israeli government that allowed October 7th to occur, the complete misery then that the people of southern Lebanon and Gaza have experienced since then as well, that folks in those areas might be saying, in all three of those regions, might be saying, we need leadership that puts our needs first and puts our lives first, because I think that's lacking for everyone. And so I really hope that everybody can have that.
So what do you tell your congregation about the fighting, and what would be a theological response as opposed to a political response?
I think that, a couple of things we learn, again, this is balancing universalism and particularism. One of the things that we learn is that in the Talmud is that every Jew is responsible for one another, and that if there's somebody who's out to try to kill you, you have to preserve your life and kill them first. And so you have to see that. And at the same time, and that might be a response in support of of the Israeli military operations. However, at the same time, on Yom Kippur, and I'm talking about this on Yom Kippur, we read the book of Jonah, and Jonah badly wants the city of Nineveh to be destroyed. And yet the people of Nineveh listen to Jonah and change their ways, and God does not destroy the city. You think Jonah would be happy. He's not happy. He wanted to see Nineveh be completely destroyed, and God chastises him for this. And we also read elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible that we're not supposed to allow for we're not supposed to celebrate our enemy's downfall, and that we are supposed to take all measures to prevent the loss of innocent life. And so for us as Jews, we need to make sure that we maintain our humanity in this, that we don't forget that the people over in Gaza or southern Lebanon are people, that they're just like us, and that we cannot celebrate their suffering. And that I think once, God willing, soon this war is over, it's on us to then try and help be the bridge builders and the people who help build up. Most people in Gaza are very young children, and Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005, pulling people out of their homes and dismantling the settlements for the sake of peace. And unfortunately, Hamas treated this as Israel retreating as a result of their terrorist activities, and said we have to keep pushing on doing this. But what it means is that most Gazans have never met a Jew, never met an Israeli, or if they have now, it's a soldier. And that's really sad. I think that we should all do something to see if we can change that.
Yeah. A last question for me. You expressed already some hopes you have for this, but as you see the fighting in the Middle East expand right now and worries of an all-out regional war increase, do you have hopes for peace anytime soon?
I do. I do. Sorry if my talk here is more political than maybe some of your other guests, but I think that I think that Israel has been held in this political lock, with only Netanyahu pretty much being the main source of power for the last 15 years. I think that Israelis are ready to get rid of him, and that we need fresh thinking over there. I think that what Israel has done with Hezbollah in the last week has, as one U.S. official said, set Hezbollah back 20 years. And when I was over in Israel this past fall, I kept hearing more than anything else while I was over there, intense fear about Hezbollah, because Hezbollah, they found documents that and videos that Hezbollah was planning to do what Hamas did on October 7th, but on a much larger scale that could have literally 100 times more casualties. And so I think that hopefully with these Israeli operations in southern Lebanon and Gaza, it could set both Hamas and Hezbollah back far enough that there won't be wars for a good while. That's my hope and prayer. But maybe I'm being optimistic. there's a joke, and I have this in one of my sermons, of the difference between a Jewish pessimist and a Jewish optimist is the Jewish pessimist says things can't get any worse than this. And the Jewish optimist says, of course they can. I believe that very strongly, is that sadly things could get a lot worse than this. But I think hopefully the region does not want to be thrown into war, and that with what's happening with Hezbollah now, it's almost a preventative action. And I really hope that it wraps up soon so that we can have some peace there, because also, what's tough is everyday people in Israel, this affects their livelihoods. If they're, when I was there, falafel stands were closed because their employees had been called up to the reserves. Souvenir shops were closed because tourists were not coming in. And your everyday people really want peace, and but they also want to live in security. And so I'm hopeful that that balance will be struck.
So let's just conclude by bringing it back to the holidays.
Yes.
And so you have New Year, which, like you said, it's like a new chance. And then you have this introspection. Like, give us your concluding message to the people in the midst of all this.
I think that this is I think back, one of the people I consider to be one of my rabbis was Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers. And he talked about after 9/11, he gave an address to the country, because no matter what age you were when 9/11 happened, he was like all of our grandpas, and could give some calm, some kindness, some wisdom. And he said, look for the helpers. When things are scary and bad, look for the helpers. And, that's, I think this past year has been, like I said, very lonely. There were a lot of people we thought would be there for us who were not. A lot of people who we thought were friends who were not. And a lot of people who did step up for us. And so a message that I have for folks is that it says in the second chapter of Genesis, it's not good for a person to be alone. And yet a lot of you felt loneliness. So what can you do to step up and be part of the solution for somebody else? And in doing so, also remove your own loneliness, but also look around at who the helpers have been, who maybe instead of just focusing on who. I think that's part of the problem with Yom Kippur sometimes is we sit and focus on all those that we have wronged it, but in particular, those who have wronged us. And a lot of times people are not thinking as much about who they have to apologize to as much as who am I expecting an apology from? Oh, there's that person. She better come say, I'm sorry to me. And we need to spend as much, if not more time thinking about those who have not let us down, those who have been our friends, those who have reached out. And also how we can follow in that example, not just how we don't do the negatives. How can we really become advocates and examples of doing the positives?
Rabbi Samuel Spector, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks to Dave Noyce.
Always a pleasure.
And to our producer, Chris Samuels. We remind our listeners they can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up. And we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.